Step into the shadows with Paranormal M, where every story uncovers a new haunting mystery. Subscribe now and ring the bell to ensure you never miss an episode. The supernatural awaits your discovery. Haunted House Happenings. So, for some quick context. I, a 33-year-old female, have always been a believer in the paranormal. Though, besides a few small instances that could be written off in my preteen years, I can't say that prior to this, I'd ever really experienced anything. My fiancé, a 37-year-old male, had experienced things prior to this, but he does remain skeptic to this day. Apologies in advance, this is going to be kind of long. Feel free to skip this paragraph bit, but I promise it's pertinent information. About 5 years ago, myself and my fiancé, as well as one of our mutual best friends, who we're going to call Kyle. He's a 36-year-old male. We'd been living together for a few years, and at the height of lockdown during the pandemic, decided to start a round-table-style stream on Twitch. That's where we talked all manner of nerdy things. We decided about 6 months into this to look for a house, as at the time 3 people, 2 dogs, and a whole semi-professional stream setup were crammed into a 2-bed apartment. And our lease was coming to an end anyways. We ended up signing a lease for a 5-bed home, which came with an insanely affordable price tag. The house was weird as all hell, in the sense of the layout. 2 stories with each story split into 2 subfloors, so essentially a 4-story home, including a fully finished basement. It's about half a story lower than the ground floor. And when I say fully finished, I mean it was essentially a full-on basement apartment, including a small sort of living room, a bed and a bath, and a laundry room. Kyle claimed that for himself. The main living room and kitchen were on the top 3rd floor, and half a story up was the master suite, the 2 smaller bedrooms. Very odd in general, but it worked as we all had a bedroom and a home office, and we all set up the basement living room as our streaming studio. The night we moved in, I was upstairs unpacking boxes in the master suite. That was while my fiancé and some friends were down in the garage. They were organizing some storage boxes. I remember the hair on the back of my neck stood up suddenly. And out of nowhere, something made a very loud "ha" sound in my ear. Almost like somebody whispering hi, but only making the H sound. Nailed it. I immediately booked it down into the garage. And it was to explain away as me being overtired or maybe hearing a plastic bag rustling in the room. I wasn't convinced, but I didn't want to push the point. Not long after that, our dog started to act up. For context, there was a very odd window in the master shower. It was large and had no screen or blind, and was literally in the wall facing out over the side of the house. It could be seen into the, kind of directly by both our next-door neighbor and the neighbor whose backyard was catty-corner from ours. I'm a tall gal, but luckily it was high enough in the wall that I wasn't putting on a show in the shower. The master bathroom also wasn't separated by a door. It was just an archway into the bathroom from the bedroom area. We had both agreed that the window gave us an unsettling feeling of being watched at night, even as it was on the 2nd floor. But then, our dog started growling into the darkness of the bathroom at night. We decided to hang a curtain to mitigate the creepiness factor of that. They would still sometimes sort of push their heads past the curtain from the bedroom and growl, which was lovely. The next issue that started to occur was an overwhelming fear of being watched when I was alone in the basement. Kyle would often travel for weeks at a time. His job was, fully remote, and he would go stay with a significant other for as long as a month at a time. It wasn't an issue when we first moved in. I would go on about my laundry and nothing was weird. But as time passed, I would feel actual gut-churning dread if I was in the basement, and each time I went to the laundry room, regardless of the AC running or any outside factor. The door to the room would inevitably slowly be pushed shut behind me. Never once happened when, another person was down there with me. But it struck a primal fear in me each time I was down there alone. The door closing in wasn't really scary per se, but coupled with the overwhelming feeling like I was being watched turned into the intense feeling of being hunted, like something wanted to trap me in the room. The worst occurrence happened late into the night one weekend long. It was after we had all returned to work. All of us are night owls, and as such, I was still awake around 3 a.m. watching a movie in the bedroom. That was while my fiancé was across the hall in his office playing video games. I must have drifted off to sleep and been awoken by something in the movie. But I had my first and only experience with sleep paralysis that night. Couldn't talk, couldn't move, struggled to breathe. What was likely only 30 seconds or so felt like hours. But once it passed, I called for my fiancé and he helped me calm me down from such a scary experience. I later turned in and went to sleep. Sometime around 4 in the morning, that was only for him to burst into the room, shake me awake, and ask if I had just been in his office. I'm sure I had a grumpy look on my face when I asked if he recalled how I was asleep, and he had to wake me up to even ask me. But he looked actually shook, which woke me up pretty quickly. He told me how he had been in the middle of a match when he saw somebody walk into his office from the door behind his chair. And he wears glasses, and glasses wearers know you can sometimes catch reflections like that, Assumed it was me waiting for his match to end. Typically, if it's a non-emergent situation, I wait, and then he'll move his noise-canceling headphones. Nose-canceling headphones. He'll move his headphones to the side so we can talk. He went about playing until something suddenly jerked the back of his office chair backwards so hard that he almost fell. Other weird things happened in that house. Bumps in the night, taps on the walls and from the attic. Our dogs being weird and sometimes either not wanting to go in the backyard at night or not wanting to come inside from the backyard. Feeling like you shouldn't go down the long hallway upstairs at night. Stayed there for 3 years and the energy of the house got progressively worse and worse. Eventually we moved out. Haven't had anything weird happen since. Not sure what was in that house or what happened there before we moved in, but I've never experienced anything like it before. And I hope I never do again. Ask Reddit. I have a fairly large property for where I live, about 4.5 acres. On this property, there's my house and a barn. This isn't your typical red door farm barn, but rather like another home-like structure that's basically just another house, minus the plumbing, which we use for equipment and storage. This barn had an upstairs room that has a bunch of friends and, that a bunch of friends and I used to use as a hangout for drinking and smoking. That was before any of us got our own place. It's important to note that there's a set of creaky wooden stairs leading up to the room that made a very distinct sound when somebody walked up, and it was very easy to hear in the room, so we always knew when somebody was walking up them. What happened in this story was confirmed by several other people that it happened to as well. No difference in story or the way that it would happen. The first time it happened was about 10 or 12 years ago. I was sitting alone up in the room by myself, one night after everybody left, just playing guitar and smoking some herbals. That's when I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I wasn't alarmed or anything because it really wasn't very out of place for random people to stop by at all hours to say hi or whatever. But I did think it was kind of strange that somebody was walking up the stairs now because I wasn't expecting anyone at that hour, and you can usually see someone pulling in the driveway. At least when they get to the house, and I didn't see anybody pull in. I hear slow footsteps coming up the stairs. First guess was my dad, as he had a very slow, methodical walk, and he was the only one that took the steps very slowly. Second guess was maybe some friends trying to prank me or sneak up on me. I hear a very slow, unmistakable knock on the door. I put on my sober face, fully prepared to open the door and talk to my father. Except, no one was behind the door when I opened it. Thought I could be going crazy and hearing things, but the sound of footsteps and knocking on the door was unmistakable. Chalked it up to being really high at the time, so I went back to the couch and resumed my guitar playing. 2 minutes later, now the spider sense is on full alert. I heard the footsteps again, slowly walking up the stairs, slowly knocking on the door. Not gonna lie, I was pretty freaked out at that point. I opened the door a second time. Nobody there. And after a mini panic attack, I gathered my stuff and went back to the house. Started to think that maybe the barn was haunted. It's possible, at least. It's an old property, and my house was built in the 1920s. Also, my property was right in the path of the Revolutionary War, so I'm sure there's a lot of activity throughout the years. But this was the first time anything like this happened. Weird part is that it never happened when there were multiple people in the barn. Only seemed to happen when one person was up there alone. And I didn't really hang out there alone too many times, as I usually went back to the house after everyone left. But there was another time when a friend got too banged up at my house, asked to crash on the couch in the barn so he didn't have to drive home for about an hour away. No problem. Went to sleep in my room and he crashed in the barn. Woke up the next morning and he was gone. He was a lingerer, so it was very odd that he wasn't there in the morning. I called him up after I woke up to make sure he was okay, and then I told him the following story. Or he told me. Sleeping on the couch, and about an hour after you left, I was woken up by a knocking at the door. Thought you came back up there because you forgot something. But it was strange that you were knocking. Went to answer the door after the knocking wouldn't stop, and I opened the door and there's no one there. Went back to sleep, and 5 minutes later I woke up again to knocking on the door. After I opened the door again and there's no one there, I immediately get into the car and drove home just scared out of my skin. There was one or two other stories that paralleled pretty much exactly these, other encounters. I had up there, along with other people, seen floating misty things around the barn at one point or another. So I guess it's pretty safe to say there's something paranormal happening in that barn. Never felt malicious or threatening, so I don't think anybody was in danger. But I still get the willies thinking about it. Still live on the property, and I just don't really go up into the barn at night alone anymore. My encounters. My first when I was a child, around 7 or 8. We had a black cocker spaniel type of a dog who hated me. She bit me a few times, but it was probably annoying her, which is fair enough. I always remember her sleeping in the cat's basket. Anyway, I was a naughty child and never wanted to go to bed, kind of alone on my own, really. I had been sent to bed one night and I had a small box TV in the corner of my room. It was on a stand, so it was high up on the wall. The TV was off and the landing light was on my door open. I could see the reflection into the hallway. So this night I'm crying and begging for my mom to come upstairs as I usually would. I looked at the TV and I could see my dogs out on my door. My dog had died. Not sure how long before I saw. Point being, she had passed away. And P.S. No one ever came to me after all my cries. I still remember it now so vivid, and I'm 28. Another time I was about 19 and living with my dad. Came in late one night through the back door where you had to walk through the kitchen into the dining room, then into a hallway where the stairs were. It was late, as I mentioned, and I didn't want to wake him, so I didn't turn any lights on. When I walked in the dining room, it was almost like I'd walked into someone or something. It knocked me back, but after shining my light, nothing was really there. Another story which still creeps me out. Me and 2 friends and 2 dogs went to like a wooded area, and that area also had caves. It was winter, so it was dark. We went into a few caves, no biggie. We get to the last cave, which is literally a kind of crack in the ground that you climb down into, and just goes down further until you reach a small opening you had to crawl through. And for some reason, I just really didn't want to be in this cave. It just gave off weird vibes. Kept just trying to tell my friends I wanted to leave, and I just didn't like it. They told me to chill, and we would leave after they had a smoke. Finally started to calm down a little bit when suddenly, one of the dogs started going mad. It was barking into the darkness toward the only exit. I was so scared. I've never been that scared in my life. I was physically shaking. It was awful. Isn't it weird how I didn't want to be there, and then that happened? Playful ghost at the wall. So my mother gave our house, which I grew in, to the church. They converted the front yard into a church, and the pastor lives in the house. We've experienced a lot of minimal ghostly encounters there. The scariest encounter was when me and my siblings were the only one left in our house. That's because my mother would go out for some prayer meetings. Sometimes they would cast demonic possessions. I was about 8 or 9 years old back then, so I heard 3 knocks on the door and immediately opened the door. That was since I was excited to see my mom. But then, no one's at the door. Then I heard another 3 knocks. I ran to open the door and no one was there, and so we heard another knock, and when I ran to open the door, my sister stopped me and proceeded to check below the door. We also checked the front and side windows, but no one was there. So my sister secured the doors. Then we heard another 3 knocks, and we began looking at each other, and that was it. Those were the times when my mother had recently cast out a possessed individual. Now that I take a visit to my childhood friend who now lives in our house, she mentions about a ghost of a man in one of our rooms. It's where we've seen our stuffed toy quickly turned around and her bed would move, like someone's laying bedside. My mom would also feel where there seems to be something knocking the ground wherever she prays. My friend also claims that there's a ghost of a child playing with her child. Then now, as I read some ghost stories, I began to remember that I used to see a white ghostly apparition of a smiling girl. She was outside the wall of the other room, just sort of fronting the room me and my siblings used to sleep, since our doors usually open at night. There are a lot more creepy stories that I've encountered, especially in my grandma's house, wherein the one is living, or we sort of call it the encanto, identified as something that could disguise themselves as living individuals that could possibly lure you into, I guess you could call it their enchanted place, inside a tree. Ghosts are identified as spirits of the dead. For my own understanding, disguising themselves as spirit of the dead. Encanto, which is Filipino, are the demonic creatures. Some are identified as nature fairies. Though, for my understanding, raised Christian, mind you, they're all fallen angels and they're categorized as different entities. Well, today is Halloween, and as somebody who's raised a Christian, I shouldn't be accustomed with these things as part of the celebration. But honestly, I really like talking about these stuffs because of various, personal experiences. As for these encantos that can lure you into their enchanted house and lure you to be their lover, I've heard some stories from my relatives who have encountered the unseeable entity that lured my other relative to be their girlfriend, who claimed to hear the footstep and the smell of aroma on the smell The aroma of Sampaguita, of the enchanted lover. Sampaguita. Maybe. Clowning around in the woods. This is something creepy that really happened to me. When I was a kid, my family lived in a neighborhood that backed up to a pretty good-sized wooded area with lots of big green trees and foliage. There were trails, and they weaved through the area between all the houses and backyards. I used to play a lot back there with the other neighborhood kids, running through the woods, climbing trees, or swinging from vines and branches. My mom had a small group of close friends from high school, and some from college. They all had children about the same time as she did. My friend Jason was one of them. He and I were the same age and got to hang out quite often. Spent a lot of time playing with Legos, trains, action figures, slot cars, Hot Wheels, and other toys, as well as playing outside with tricycles. Sometimes even bicycles or scooters, running around with our imaginations going wild. We spent a lot of time in the woods behind the house. My family, my mom, dad, little sister, and I moved away from there when I was about 7 years old. But we would still make trips back to visit friends and family. I'd get to see Jason every few years. Sometimes we would drive through the neighborhood to see the old house again. The woods always looked a lot smaller than how I remember seeing them as a kid. But I have very vivid memories of that place. When I was in my early teens on one of these visits with Jason, when we were alone, our parents and family in another room, he asked, "Do you remember that time when me and you saw a clown in the woods behind your old house?" This question caught me off guard. That's because I had no recollection of this happening. Sounding very confused, I asked, "What? A clown in the woods?" I was puzzled because if something like this happened to me as a child, I'm sure I would have been traumatized and remembered forever. He answered, "Yeah. We were running through the woods, just me and you. Went around a bend in the path, and there was a clown standing there, staring at us. We freaked out, turned around, and ran all the way back to your house." I've never been afraid of clowns. Jason is definitely afraid of clowns. I've always wondered why some people are. I know it's not uncommon, maybe because of movies. But anyway, as I said, imaginations would run wild playing G.I. Joe in the woods, pretending to be Ninja Turtles or other superheroes. I wasn't sure how much of Jason's memory was fabricated or, at least embellished. Like maybe something happened that I don't think was a big deal, but to him maybe was. Kind of just brushed it off, saying I didn't remember anything like that happening. We continued to hang out until it was time to leave. Every once in a while, the memory of him, asking this question would come back, making me wonder for some part of it being true. A few years later, a little bit further into my teens, went back in to visit family and friends. I got to see Jason again, and just like before, when we were alone, he asked, "Do you remember that time we saw a clown in the woods behind your house?" I answered, "Dude, I remember you asking me about that before. I don't remember anything like that happening. And are you sure you're not just making it up? Maybe it's just a dream you had, perhaps." He said, "I swear it happened. We were running through the woods, just you and me. We came around a bend and saw a clown standing there staring at us. Freaked us both out, and we basically just froze there. And I remember looking over at you, and you were just looking back at me, all wide-eyed. We were both so scared that we ran back to your house as fast as we could." I sat there in silence, processing what he said, and I don't even know if my mind was playing tricks on me. But this time I did have a faint recollection of this actually happening. However, in my mind, there's no way it could have been an actual person. I had a vision of one of those inflatable clown punching toys that would pop up after you punch it over and over, sort of looking half deflated and sad, hanging from a tree branch. I told Jason this, and there's no way it could have been a real clown. Maybe his brain was just making things up. We were just kids after all. He was adamant that this actually happened, and that it was a real clown. It was just standing there in the woods staring at us. Eventually, we moved on to another subject. Don't really talk about it again. Many years later, in my mid-20s, my family made another trip back there. Even as an adult, James brought it up to the whole thing again. The conversation this time was much shorter. I recall saying something like, "That's so weird, I can't remember anything like that ever happening, but now that you brought it up every time I visit, it's almost like maybe it could have been real." And here I am at 40 years old. Every once in a while I think about Jason and the clown in the woods. I'm not sure if my brain is manifesting memories, and I have no way of knowing if any part of this recollection is true. There's definitely a faint memory in my mind that I can't deny. Even though we're still concerned via our parents, we asked him about it since. I wonder if he would remember it. Could the ghost of my grandfather still be wandering my house? First, a little backstory. My grandmother and grandfather moved in with my family in 2018 in May. I was about 12 at the time. My grandmother and I were extremely close. 2012, they had a stroke, leaving him paralyzed. Got an infection in his leg, leading to it becoming amputated. My grandmother could basically no longer care for him, so they moved in with us. Fast forward 3 months, and he passed away on August 3rd, 2018, in my basement in his bedroom. Last year, 2024, I would have been 17 at this time, sleeping in my basement on Grandma's couch. No reason whatsoever. Maybe I was just more comfortable down there. It was about 10-12 feet from his bedroom. I woke up in the middle of the night and I could smell him. I know how weird this sounds, but it was literally a scent. Smell mixed with aqua velva and Irish Spring. Just kind of typical old man smell, but so distinct to him. I pointed, just kind of, sorry, I'm going cross-eyed over here. I pinpointed it right to his smell once I noticed it. Looked around and noticed his bedroom door was open, which it was, but my grandma always left it open anyway. The smell lingered for about 2 minutes and then left, and haven't smelled it since. Could this have been my grandfather visiting or watching over me? All the paranormal bits and pieces squeezed out from my life. If you're interested. I think it's a little important to mention that my late grandmother from my mother's side used to communicate with the dead. Usually her family members. She saw them in the dark windows of her apartment or received messages from them in her dreams. They were always outside, never coming in. So there was always a barrier of glass between them and her. Once she proved it definitely by telling the living members of the family about a letter that was about to be delivered from the government. Grandma told them precisely what it will include. Pre-internet times, and she was very specific. She told me once that some part of our family comes from 2 Belarusian children saved during war. They were saved by traveling gypsies, and they learned their craft, quote-unquote, and passed it down, but less and less each generation. None really knows the details of their ancestry anymore. Other than that, Grandma was able to predict somebody passing either via dreams, in which she saw teeth of said person falling out, or by a precognition brought by some little black spirit that she was never able to tell more about. She described it as a little black ball passing through the floor of the room. I am way, way younger than my siblings, so she didn't speak much time with me. She did with my siblings, though. One time she took my sister somewhere, I'm not sure where. I'll have to ask her. And as they were driving the bus or train, they saw an old castle or other old building that used to be owned by nobles. God, I really have to ask my sister about this incident to get more details. But anyway, my sister, was able to tell my grandma all the story of that place, from the perspective of somebody who lived there. Religion, Grandma was a deep Catholic believer. My parents, Protestants. So, moving on to my life. My earliest memories come from times when I couldn't be older than 1.5 or 2 years old. Diapers, milk bottles, but walking. We used to live in a flat in one of those post-communist Polish apartment buildings. Tiny rooms, old Eastern European carpets. Often, I would wake up, lay in bed, and hear voices speaking. That on its own isn't weird. The walls were thin, but it was either family members that couldn't possibly be there, or ones that were sleeping in the same room and were just lying silent. But their voices were calling me from behind the wall. Same goes for our old dog. He would sleep with me in bed, but I would hear a specific bark from somewhere else. As I grew older, it continued to happen from time to time. I have a memory from when I was around maybe 4. It's where my parents tell me that it's just from apartments next to ours and not to worry. I was little, so I didn't find it scary. It was just weird to me. At that age, I also had a weird reoccurring nightmare. A toy that falls down like a falling star and appears in our home. It was a doll that somehow rode like a car and couldn't climb. Her touch was burning my skin. So I was climbing on the counters and tables to run away. That one I really thought was just a nightmare up until 2025. When I was 5, we moved to our current home. The second home. But the first one never even lived here and didn't even finish the house. Voices followed. Now, I'm sure I could hear people. And they were not inside the house. Also, there were those little noises, like if mice or rats were behind the walls and furniture. I know, cliche, but that's what I heard. Things were giving out those little cracks way too often, especially when I was trying to go to sleep. I often ran to my parents to tell them about it, but they would always shrug it off. They said it was my imagination or that the birds might be landing on the window or the roof, outside of my view. Or just, it's normal, go to sleep. When I was about 7, I saw a shadow person or shape, like shifting thing. It was slightly like a lava lamp. I do wear strong glasses, and I was without them when I woke up from an after-dinner nap, and I noticed it. There is no other explanation for anything else to be possible to be standing in the middle of my room in the afternoon, tall, black as a void, and moving slightly. I was so scared I couldn't even squeak. So I hid underneath my covers until somebody came to wake me up. As soon as the doors opened, I jumped from that room. Never happened a second time. Around that age, I also discovered that I can tell when a dream is actually a dream and force myself to wake up. For a couple of years, it was the tapping, cracking, usual stuff. I learned to play with it a little bit. If I couldn't sleep, I would whisper, "Play the piano." And slowly, I would hear some quiet piano music. We had one in a different room, and actually still the same house. Not sure why, but I never tried anything else. I think I was too scared. As I was around 12 in the early 2000s, I started to explore heavy music and metal and goth and punk subcultures. And along with that, esoteric sites and books. I literally devoured anything outside of Christian views. That was because I was starting to hate the church that we were attending. Starting to see the deeply running hypocrisy. I gulped down ghost stories, horror books, documentaries of ancient civilizations and religions, to be honest, really. Didn't really change much. My tastes just matured a bit. I was kind of used to having nightmares or just dreams with such stuff. Thought it was actually cool because I learned how to lucid dream because of it. Didn't always work though. Waking up was still easy, but changing the world around it, turning back to nightmares was difficult. A few months later, something weird started happening. Often in the morning, as I'm leaving the house, I would have this persistent thought. Which parent would I prefer to die? Whoa. I remember this well because I had a diary. It's where I would put all my weird thoughts, ideas, teenage stuff, and I wrote about it there, marking the dates. It's important that you know it happened before October 2007. I didn't want to decide, but quietly deep inside I always picked my mom. By that time, she was pretty depressed and sometimes aggressive and kind of yelling. I've seen her slap my adult sister and throw stuff. Rarely even walking outside and just smoking, reading romances in one small, unfinished bathroom in the house. My father, he was a workaholic, but I loved spending time with him. Never raised his voice, was always kind and fair. Then I started to dream almost every night about dying animals. There were always cats and dogs, many of them. They were inside the house, and I would either find them dead in my dream, or they would die as soon as I touched them. I literally saw the life leaving their bodies. Sometimes they then stood up, and I knew that they were reanimated corpses, and so I forced myself to wake up at this point. Some months after this started, my mother started to appear in those dreams. She would always run away from those animals screaming, and they would just run after her. I would wake up crying as soon as I could, and it was terrible. And then it happened, October 2007. My father woke me up in the middle of the night. The paramedics were already there. He told me to pray and return to the police downstairs. No one ever found out what was the cause. She started to choke in the middle of the night, but her airways were clear, so they wrote the cause to be a heart stroke. She died in the house before they could take her to the ambulance. Never saw her that day, really. My father didn't let me. Furthest I could go was the stairs, and from there I just saw her pale feet in the floor. Never got to say goodbye. Coffin was closed, and funeral seemed unreal. The tapping and cracking and the voices went away. Nothing ever showed itself in the house, though my grandma told me to be careful because she had a dream of my mother coming for me to take me away. She didn't wear her usual clothes in that dream, but a dark gray-green cloak. Sometimes I could see her in my dreams, always silent and not really moving, not even smiling. I could ask her questions to which she would just nod and shake her head. She didn't always want to answer. Sometimes she just stood there. And those were the dreams I couldn't change even a little bit, or even forcefully wake up from. But even those eventually ended too. As a late teen/young adult, I tried a few seances, spells and such. Nothing much happened really. We used to make sleepover parties in the woods, and I've got lost during one. It was way past midnight and I couldn't see anything. My phone stopped working. I prayed to anything and everything so hard for it to just shine some light. Just a little bit. That way I could find my way back to the others. And it did. For a minute the screen went white. Never ever did, just this once. All white and bright. Then dead again. But found my way back. Coming back in time a little bit when I was around 16, decided to smoke a little weed with a friend on the balcony of my room. We were alone in the house, and under the influence we both could see shadow silhouettes crawling from the garden toward the balcony. I heard the piano music again, went inside, and I said, "Don't worry, we can't get inside the house anymore." I don't know why I said that, but somehow I just knew it was true. Years passed, and I'm 31 now. I'm with my husband and 2 kids. We live with my dad in the same house, saving up to build a new one on the land that we bought a year ago. Life is good. I still fear the garden when it's dark, but nothing ever happened again. I learned more of the old ways, Slavic, Northern, Celtic, some of the modern witchcraft. And I make sure to secure my house and children. Maybe it's all just a coincidence. But if there's even the slightest chance that it wasn't, then there's a little thing that separates the forces on the outside from us, then I want them safe. Clearly, Christianity alone wasn't doing the work for my parents. My son sometimes says he fears that somebody might break in and can't tell who he has in mind. My daughter, almost 3 years old, often wakes up and cries and screams without being able to say why, really. She asks for me to come, even if she's in my arms. So, I recently started to wonder if she means a mother from her previous life, maybe. I'm not sure if really probing about the subjects is a great idea, though. For now, I just like to think it's normal nightmares. So there's that as well. Grandma died a few years after my mother, though she was pretty adamant that one of my sister's daughters is her next reincarnation, and many things actually prove it to some extent. Character, day, month, hour of birth are the same, and more. Though it's a whole, really other story, not really mine to tell. Early spring 2025. My son is about to turn 7. Today I had a weird dream. We were in an old shop with oddities. A lady was selling some black metal band vinyls, and she told me I can have one for free if I pet a dying cat she has in the box. Whoa there. In the dream, I was concerned about the cat's well-being. I told her that I'll take the cat and we should just drive to the vet. When she opened the box, it ended up being some weird toy. It was moving on its own, trying to escape. Can't remember if it succeeded because my daughter woke me up with a shout. Though she didn't wake up, I listened for a while and noticed that my son wasn't sleeping. It was about 8 o'clock already, maybe 7:40-ish. Came to me and told me about this weird dream about a shark toy with 3 cats sitting on it. Told me the toy was driving into his room and the cats were cute, till the eyes of one of them changed like he was being hypnotized. His description. Cats attacked him. I calmed him down, telling him it was just a nightmare and everything's going to be okay. But I have this sick feeling in my guts telling it's about to happen again, and it's some sort of a cycle. And now that I think about it, everything recently breaks, mainly electronics. Like if the probability of negative things happening is maybe even higher. Other semi-paranormal things that happen. Tarot cards are always right and helpful when I use them. So are the runes. They can be very specific. Some of my friends and family experienced these things with me. My sister had tried them alone, though. A light bulb above her head shattered. On the beginning of 2025, I couldn't locate documents for a car I had made new ones for a couple of months back with. Looked everywhere and finally decided to just track them via psychic method. The Claires were on the edge in the middle of the height of the room, partially covered. Cold. Smell of paper and dust. There's a light, sort of little one, no total darkness. Ended up to still be in the office, even though I clearly remember taking them home. And as I watched the clerk getting them, sure thing, they were on a dusty shelf near the window. It was in transparent foil. Transparent foil. It was with other documents on a level of a desk. Also, old previously lost documents reappeared in the top of the pulpit in another car, next to the steering wheel. Like if somebody just placed them there. And yes, I searched there before. The closer it gets to some major event, like my kid being accepted to school, etc., I do have a strong precognitive feeling. Something telling me that it will be bad or good. I predicted both kids' sexes before doctors could, which I was driving there to ask. I knew my daughter wasn't accepted into kindergarten, just as I knew when my son was accepted to school. I I do have sort of I guess you could call it a feeling. It's when some job wouldn't work out well, or if somebody will go especially well. Though not everything brings these feelings, this is why I don't rely on them too much. I'm yet to see what the future brings. From mine and my family's experiences, I can tell you for sure, there's more around than the eyes can see. Ask Reddit. This happened in 2016. I was at a local festival in my hometown with some friends. There was a big crowd, so I lost my friends, but I had a few beers. It was easy for me to make some small talk with some random folks. The young woman and the guy mentioned were among them. I'd guess he was in his late 40s. He looked really normal, nothing special about him. Talked to one of his female friends about the band playing and such, and suddenly, the guy asks me if I have a problem with my knee. I did, actually. I had a running injury. I didn't have a limp, and it would only hurt when I'm running. You couldn't tell by just looking at me. Then he explained to me that he can tell people about their injuries. That's because they're related with our past lives. Chronic or heavy pains, according to him. They're related to the way you died in a past life. Even though I didn't believe a word he said, I had fun with the conversation and asked him about my knee. I can do that too, but minus the past life part. He said that he could tell that I have an old soul, and that the knee injury might actually be one of my war wounds from my life as a legionnaire in the Roman army. He told me that he could tell that I died on a battlefield, and by the way, I'm from Western Europe. Still skeptical, of course. I asked him how he could throw all of that just by looking at me. It's just what I see now. I could do a session with you in one time and look in many more past lives. I passed on the opportunity, but I did ask him if I died from my knee injury. No, he replied. You died from a wound in your stomach. And suddenly he stepped toward me and slightly pressed his index and middle finger into my stomach. It felt like a taser, as if an electronic shock went through my whole body. Even my fingertips tingled. I suddenly bent forward in pain, and when I looked up, he and his friend just stood there smiling. He gave me his card and told me to call him if that made me curious. I just thanked him. I wished him all the best, tried to stay calm. But I was scared shitless. Saw one of my friends shortly after and told him what happened. Well, no beer for you anymore, he replied, and I laughed it off. Never saw the guy again, and I lost his card a long time ago. Still think about it from time to time, even though I still don't believe in a soul or the afterlife. Just can't get the idea that reincarnation might be real out of my head. Don't believe in a soul, huh? Ask Reddit. It's 2 a.m. Not a breath of sound. I sit at the diner table, just under the single light bulb eating frosted flakes. I am the only soul in the entire house. The family's gone and the doors are all locked. I feel tired, but the cereal is delicious. The light bulb suddenly flickers. Weird, that doesn't usually happen. Okay, back on. No problems, at least I can finish. Not 4 feet away, the back door opens. The door opens. Several things happen at this precise moment. And if you're able to capture it in slow motion, it would look like this. Milk and cereal splashing and scattering across the table. A spoon clinks on the floor. I've discovered the secret to human flight, and my body floats effortlessly 4 feet off the ground. My chair tumbles backward beneath me, but I give no heed. My mouth is open in horror, unable to make a noise. My eyes are locked on the door. The door. It swings open to the fullest amount. but all I can see is the blackness of the outside. When my feet touch the ground, I sprint several feet backward. I catch my breath. The door frame is still empty. Nothing appears to have moved the door, and I don't feel any wind. I can hear nothing. What the hell? After I gather courage, I investigate. The door handle is locked, but it must not have clicked completely when it was shut. I figure the house must have had some pressure change somewhere else, and the suction is what did it. And the light bulb died, I think, a few days after. So it was just random chance. I hope. A little girl lives in my parents' house. Hey everyone. In 2004, my mom and I moved into my stepdad's house. Some of the craziest, most unbelievable things have happened over the years. Excuse me. And as I was recalling some events to my husband, I realized I'd forgotten some of them, probably out of fear. Thought this would be the best place to remember them all. I'll answer any questions you may have also. And sorry, this is so long. First thing I can remember happening is the freezer door. It was a super innocent event, and we didn't think anything of it at the time. We'd gotten grocery shopping, and after kind of just putting the frozen food in the freezer, the door would close just fine. But once you turned your back, it was wide open again. This happened time and time again throughout the rest of the night. Checked multiple times to make sure a box or something wasn't in the way of the suction. There's no reason for it to open by itself. While watching TV in the living room, the channel would change constantly. Not up a channel or down a channel either. For example, if I were in my 40s, it would go to channel 3 or 5. Or if I were in the 40s. Not my 40s. I got a new bed. One of the ones where there's drawers along the bottom of it, 3 on each side. Because my bedroom was so little, I had the bed pushed up against a wall, meaning that 3 of the 6 drawers were inaccessible. I was in the 4th or 5th grade at the time, otherwise known as too weak and little to move the bed myself. But random items of my mom started disappearing. One of her slippers, a couple of CDs, and some other things I can't remember. We thought it was my stepbrother playing a dumb prank. One day, we decided to rearrange my room. And after the bed was moved for some reason, we opened up the middle drawer on the inaccessible side. Everything was in there. The slippers, CDs, and the most strange thing we found was a Ziploc bag of old used wax crayons that I never owned. I guess the next thing that we noticed was the ceiling fan. My parents had a sailor theme in the living room, and attached to the ceiling fan chain was a lighthouse, which would sometimes swing a little if the fan were on high. But it would swing around as if somebody flicked it when the fan wasn't on. My mom, my friend, and I were standing in the living room. We were talking about the lighthouse ceiling fan just sort of swinging around, and I was applying chapstick, which I then put on the coffee table. The moment I put it down, I realized I should have put it in my pocket. But it was missing off the table, so I said out loud, "Where's my chapstick?" And I shit you not, swearing everything. It appeared in midair above the coffee table and fell straight down. It was as if someone was holding it and dropped it. We all ran out of the room, and none of us really talk about it to this day. My mom approached me one morning and told me not to lie to her and that she wouldn't be mad, just tell the truth. When she realized I had no clue what she was talking about, she told me how the night before, she woke up and heard a little girl's voice humming into her ear, as if she was standing next to the bed. My mom checked the entire house, including my room, just to make sure it wasn't me. I didn't believe her at all. That was until years later, while babysitting my grandmother, who then lived with them while they were away. I slept in my mom's bed and awoke to a little girl humming in my ear. It was the scariest moment of my entire life. I was numb from fear, and I think I passed out from it, just because I don't remember falling back asleep. I remember being terrified, feeling every hair on my body standing straight up, and then nothing. Morning. I haven't told anybody that this happened. One night my mom was cooking in the kitchen down the hall. I was in my room. Heard the front door open and my dog jump around greeting someone. I assumed it was just my stepdad. Peered down the hall. Saw a man in overalls and a blue knit hat walking. No sooner than he turned the corner, my mom comes running down the hallway towards me, pale white, crying. It was as if she felt somebody come behind her and say, "Hi," into her ear. But she was alone in the kitchen. Both ran to the living room, realized the driveway was empty, and waited for the empty driveway until my dad actually came home. To this day, we don't know who the man was that came into our home. My scariest ghost experience. I lived in Union, Maine for the first 14 years of my life. A beautiful blue farmhouse with a huge basement, backyard, and blueberry field. I had been hearing some strange sounds coming from my basement. My mom never wanted me to go down there. It led my mind to get the best of me, and I decided to go down one day. My mom wasn't home, and I was there with my dog, so little me took my dog down with me so I wasn't scared. Walked down the 13 stairs to the basement, and my feet hit the floor, my dog right on my tail. When you walk down the stairs, you can go left or right. If you turn left, there's a little room. We used it as a bedroom for my older brother. If you turn right, there was the garage area where we would bring cars in to work on them, along with the wood stove in the boiler room. Stacked along the wall was nothing but wood that we used for heat. I remember walking around the area barefoot, stepped on a nail, screamed in pain, and wobbled my way up the stairs and tried to pull it out when my mom came home and found me in a pool of blood. Bandaged up my foot, and I was sent outside to play while my mom spent the afternoon sweeping up the basement. Spent a few days later, I wanted to go down again, so I did. Once again, brought my dog with me. This time I made sure to wear shoes. Made it over to the boiler room when I heard a small moan. That's when my dog started to freak out. He was growling and the hair standing up on the back of his neck, and he was as nervous as I was. I panicked and once again ran back upstairs. Spent a few days wanting to figure out what was down there. Gave up for a while. One night I was lying in bed. You know when you're almost asleep and you get jumped awake? Well, I jumped when I did, and I kicked my dog in the process. I fell to the ground, unable to move. Only thing I could move were my eyes, and they darted across the room at a corner where I was always kind of scared of. There, stood in that corner, was a tall black shadow. Tried to scream, but nothing came out. Tried to sweat as it walked over to me. I stopped right at my bedside. I looked at the clock and it said 2:07 a.m. And this is when my body awoke. I looked at my clock and it said 7:02 a.m. I was asleep the whole time. Told my mom about it, but of course no one believed me. Wanted so badly to know what this thing was. A few weeks later, I had just come home from school. My mom wasn't home, so I didn't do my homework, because as kids do, I wanted to play. My neighbor was home, so I decided to have him come outside to play with me in my basement. And this is when things took a dark turn. He brought a Ouija board. We played around at the table downstairs when a pen spun around and hit me in the guts. He laughed and thought it did it on purpose when we both let go of the board. That's when the light stayed to flicker. The board flipped up on its side. He threw it into a wood stove, but it wouldn't catch fire. That's when we knew that we needed to get out of there. Started to run up the stairs, and when I was pushed down them, he didn't stop until he was at the top when he finally noticed. Working with a ghost. I'd gotten called into a shift at work. I only had to work from 6:30 to 10, so I wasn't really thinking it was going to be too bad. But it still felt really long. Or really, really slow. Anyways, my best friend and I had to shift together. So of course we'd chit-chat when no one was around. She was working deli and I was the register. Well, I ended up needing to use the bathroom, so I had her cover register for me. My legs were hurting pretty bad, so I sat in there for a few minutes in silence. I heard the door start to wiggle like somebody was trying to open it, so I yelled out, "Wrong bathroom," and it stopped. Customer bathroom key is really loud because it has a metal piece on it, so I would have heard it if it was picked up. Never heard anything. Door once again started to wiggle, and this time more aggressively. I immediately texted my friend on Snapchat to see if it was her messing with me, but it wasn't. And so I got up and went out. Not a soul customer in the store. I was a little freaked out, but this is when it started getting really weird. It was like 7:30 or 8 and it was really windy out. We're just talking to each other at the register. That's because there's no one in the store. And all of a sudden the office door slammed shut. Not a breeze in the store, no one in sight, just us. You have to physically slam shut the door for it to close, and it slammed. She had left for the night at around 9 o'clock, and I was alone for about an hour. So I started doing my coffees, which involves me going to the kitchen to dump them in the sink. But anyways, I'm dumping coffees and I hear a loud crash out in the store. So I ran out to find nothing. So I went to go back into the kitchen, and the sink was running, which I didn't turn on in the first place. At this point, I started to get angry. I yelled out, "Whoever's messing with me, stop. It's not funny." The store went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop, basically. So I put on some music to ease the quiet. 9:55 rolled around and, started to close down. I was counting down my drawer when I heard a crash come from the kitchen. And I was the only one here. I'd locked the door already and checked the back door. Locked. Finished my count, walked the clock out, and as I unlocked the door and put the code in to leave, I yelled out, "Leave me alone and stop fucking with me." I walked out, shut the door down, and left. Garage living. Hey everyone. So I've been experiencing some crazy things recently. One which really freaked me out. I'll build up to this. A few days ago, I was waiting for my fiancé to get home from work. So I was playing video games. I heard "baby" come from down the stairs, so I called him to see if he came home early. Now, the baby thing we say to each other when he comes home, so we don't really know who's entering the garage. We do it in a very high-pitched voice, so it's hard to copy. Well, I heard him say it. And anyways, he answered and said that he wasn't home yet. But he was on the way. At this point, it was about 8:45, and he walks home from work, so he's usually home at around 8 or 9. He came home and up the stairs. It was Sunday. So I decided, since my investigation was canceled, which was ghost hunting, I would watch Ghost Hunters instead. Bad idea. We were about maybe halfway through a first video. That's when the power went out, followed by some random noises downstairs. So we threw on our shoes and coats and went to investigate. The lights in the house were still on and nothing was unplugged. So I went inside and hit the reset button on the outlet in the bathroom, which connects to the garage. We had power, and I just came back outside to walk back to the garage, and I hear whistling coming from where my fiancé was standing waiting for me. I asked him if he heard the whistling. He said he thought it was me. So we went back upstairs and put on Family Guy. Didn't do anything different with the power, so where did it go? Anyways, fast forward to yesterday. I'm filming a TikTok outside explaining what's going on. When I got to the part explaining the whistling, it was like my entire memory was wiped. I don't really remember what I had said before that. There's something messing with us. Now, if you believe in SWs, I believe that it's like a whistling war. I believe I've been hearing it pretty much everywhere I go. It's just loud whistling. Like a man walking down the road and whistling. Roosevelt Island Haunting. When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in an apartment in New York City on Roosevelt Island, which is nestled between Manhattan and Queens. The island has a dark history, and at one point there were insane asylums and a smallpox hospital. It's actually pretty fascinating. But with all that suffering, the island seemed to still carry that burden. So our apartment was laid out in a sort of an L shape. Living room, dining room faced the hallway, and there was a bathroom at the end of the hall that was small and led to 2 bedrooms, one of which had a balcony off of it. I'm not gonna lie, we had a serial killer view, and if we were going to die, well, oops. We had a killer view, and for a dorm, we felt like we were living in some place that was pretty large. But not long after we moved in, my 3 roommates and I began to all experience some things. It started with the feelings like we were being watched all the time. I remember specifically I was home alone and working on a mural. Or, art student stuff. I began to feel very uneasy, like somebody was right behind me the whole time watching me. This went on for maybe about an hour. Couldn't shake this feeling. But I just did my best just to roll with it, and I'll admit it, I was scared. I was relieved when my roommates got home. As the semester continued, my roommate and I had a huge project due. In order to accommodate all the space that was needed to do it, we turned to working in the living room. I worked on this project for the first and headed back to bed as my roommate worked on hers. Laying in my bed reading with my arms, or rather with my back to the door, when I saw this tall shadow come up from my book and felt like somebody was behind me. Thinking it was my roommate, I turned to see what she wanted and she wasn't there. Shrugged it off, kept reading. The shadow once again crept up onto my book. I moved by my blankets and then my head, and the shadow didn't move. At this point, I was scared, but felt ridiculous if I mentioned it. So I pulled the corners up over my head and just went to sleep. Fast forward to Halloween. We had a party and a bunch of friends were over. And as the night wore on, we started talking about ghosts and spooky stuff. And lo and behold, it comes up about how and... Sorry, my eyes are going crisscross. Fast forward to Halloween, and we had a party and a bunch of friends were over, and then night wore on, we started talking about ghosts and spooky stuff. And how to behold, it comes up about how everybody thinks our place is a little spooky. My roommate starts to tell a story about how one night we had a project due, about one night before we had the project due, and we, who would take turns. She says she was working on a project and she saw someone out of the corner of her eye walking in the hallway. So she gets up thinking it's me, and turns out that I'm asleep. She goes back to do her project and she feels someone come up on her. All the hairs on my back and her neck, they all just stand up. Once again, no one's there. Now at this point, I never mentioned to her what happened to me that same night. Told her my story, and we're both in shock. The more we talk, a few more people mentioned feeling like they were going to get pushed off the balcony every time they went out there. When it comes out of the two, it comes to the 2 of them. 2 of her children. They had the exact same dream when they slept over. They were paralyzed and began floating and then began to uncontrollably spin. At this point, I'm convinced something is happening. Sometime later, I began to start seeing, shadow figures often out of the corner of my eye in the hallway. It was dark with no features, and I only saw, Well, it was like the peripheral. Then it quickly darted, and that's when I would look on. Convince myself it was just my eyes until my friend, myself, and my own eyes, till my friend was over. We're sitting at the table talking, and I got distracted by the second because I saw it. I said, "Saw what?" And she replied, "That black thing in the hallway." Never told her that I saw it before, so I felt totally vindicated. The pinnacle of my experience happened when it was winter break. My roommates had to go live home, and I was the last one there. Not wanting to be alone, I just called a friend to stay. We were talking about going out, and so I just kind of went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. The bathroom to brush my teeth, and the door was open because we were still just kind of talking. That's when there was a pause in our conversation. I heard a voice plain as day whisper my name loudly and directly into my ear. At this point, I visibly freaked out. I confirmed with my friends, and she said that basically nothing. Item flung across the room. Any explanation? Let me preface this by saying I graduated from UCLA, and I was a science and math degree. I don't believe in random paranormal experiences that are not explainable by science. I was leisurely plucking long leg hairs on the second floor while my 2 children and husband were all downstairs with some random black objects getting flown across the room. There was no wind, and I have no pets, and there was no earthquake. The house was not shaking. So, I'm naturally pretty confused as to how this could have happened. I started questioning my sanity, wondering if I was hallucinating, because how else can anybody explain something so strange, like how? Well, what's even more interesting is that previous night in my dream, it's where I'm just sort of conscious but asleep in that in-between sleep state. I was visited by an angry ghost who tried to choke me. This is something I believe because, well, you either are somewhat asleep, so it's kind of explainable. But things being flung across the room in broad daylight is like, what? How did that happen? My husband is a medical doctor, and he confirmed as I'm not hallucinating. That's because I don't have any drugs, and I'm a healthy mother who doesn't drink or smoke. I've never hallucinated before, and I had full sleep in very much time, basically. Not too scared, though. I just told the ghost or whatever it was to go away, and what's funny is that when you see that happen in front of your eyes, you're confused, but your mind just kind of wants to explain it away because it doesn't really, make any logical sense. So it doesn't even really seem that scary. It's like, oh well, it happened, but I'm too busy to care, so I go take care of the kids.